For several years, most of the state of California, according to the Drought Monitor, has held the extreme drought status. Until late December, until recently here in January, the state's received up to 5 times the annual rainfall. This recent change of events has certainly been a blessing in disguise for many producers in this region, but it's also created several challenges. Joining us on this episode of FieldLink is CJ Meyer from the Alta Water District in the San Joaquin Valley. CJ is also involved in the irrigation business, and he'll share some insight about recent rainfalls and some of the long-term impact that producers may face. Also joining us is Matt Beene and Brian Gogue from Hanford, California. They'll join us to discuss some of the agronomic challenges that growers may face, as well as some of the challenges consumers may face at the grocery store over the next few months. And finally, we'll travel back to the center of the United States to catch up with Jody Lawrence as we discuss the recent spikes in diesel prices. Stay tuned for this episode of FieldLink. And welcome back to FieldLink. I'm your host, Bill Smith. We're excited today to have CJ Myers. He's a member with the Alta Water District in Kingsburg, California. And when CJ is not, participating in the water district and some of the duties he has there, he's also works for Streamline Irrigation and Services there in California. CJ, welcome to FieldLink.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's good to be here with you.
Awesome. CJ, tell us a little bit about you, your background, and just a little bit about more about you and the water district.
So the water district thing is pretty new to me. I've actually only been in there for about a month. So at this point, I'm really still drinking out of the fire hose when it comes to that part of it. I've been in the irrigation industry for 11 or 12 years now, strictly commercial, agricultural irrigation. So I think as far as the district stuff, I can talk about a little of that. I don't know. I still have a lot to learn on that end of it, but as far as California water policy here in Central California, I've been involved heavily with that over the last 10 years and had a front row seat to a lot of the changes with SGMA and improving our growers' systems to comply with a lot of that new change in policy. So,
CJ, clearly a lot's been happening in California. The media for the last 5-10 years, clearly water has become a big issue in that state, as well as a lot of other Western states, for that matter. But most recently, you've received a tremendous amount of rain here in the last 30 to 45 days throughout California. Tell us a little bit about where you're located and what's really going on in your geography right there.
Sure. So we're in Central California. I live about 20 minutes east of Fresno towards the foothills. And then Streamline, where we operate out of, is in Kingsburg, which is about 30 minutes straight south of Fresno, and Fresno is pretty much the main city everybody knows about. So I kind of use that for a reference on almost everything. Sure. We've seen a lot of rain over the last month and a half. A lot of the stuff you see on the news, they want something exciting. They're not really even talking about our area for the most part. But they want to get people's attention, so they're going to focus on flooding in LA and maybe some of the smaller towns up north. But for the most part in our area, we've had a tremendous amount of runoff. We've also had a pretty good opportunity to capture a lot of this water in some of the reservoirs locally. And because the snow level has been really high, a lot of this rain has come down the hill and actually collected in the reservoirs already. So we have a decent snowpack, but it's really high right now. So we have a lot of water that, we'd like to be storing as snow has come down already in our particular area.
Yeah. So the as far as the reservoir, some of the research that I've seen, they're looking pretty good as far as, being re-energized, I guess, or refilled. And there's still a pretty good snowpack in the Sierra Nevadas. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah, snowpack is pretty good right now, and I'm always hesitant to get too excited about it in January because I've lived in California my whole life, and we've seen snowpack and rain above average in January more times than I can count. And then we end up grabbing and struggling for water once we get to March and, through the growing season. So the snowpack looks decent right now, but I'm always really hesitant to count our eggs before they hatch here, because we've seen this a lot of times where it looks like a great outlook, and then we're scrambling at the last, later months of the early spring. So.
And CJ, some of the research that I've done, April seems to be the golden month when we can really ground truth, how that snowpack is going to impact overall water supply. Is that still pretty accurate in your opinion?
Yeah, it really is. And that's a good time to evaluate snowpack, in my opinion. And the problem that we've had is sometimes even if the snowpack is good, if it gets super hot real early, we end up having to release a lot of that at a rate that's not useful. So, a good snowpack and a slow warming in the summer is really what we would like to see. But I feel like especially over the last 15 years, we've had a lot of early heat, and that sends a lot of that water down. And, if it's coming down too quick, we just can't capture all of it. We have to make sure we're not going to overflow reservoirs. And so that becomes tricky. But yeah, this is the same issue we've faced in California for years and years and years.
CJ, clearly the snowpack and the rain is really helping recharge a lot of the reservoirs. But what about some of the subsurface areas, some of the aquifers? Will these recent rains really impact, that aquifer base?
Yes, they will in certain areas, obviously a lot more than others. So a good example where I live in Reedley, I'm actually about a half a mile from the Kings River, which is the river that flows out of Pine Flat Reservoir, which is one of our larger reservoirs in our area here. It's about 1 million acre feet of storage. And it's interesting because where I live, we farm about 8 acres of citrus. So I have a pretty good size ag well. I'll see the water level. I've seen the water level come up in my personal well this year substantially. And I'm in an area where it doesn't fluctuate much. Mine might fluctuate 5 or 10 feet over the course of a season. If you go 6 miles east of me, it's a completely different story. You might have 50 to 100 feet of fluctuation in some of these wells. And so the impact on those wells, what we're seeing already is that those are recovering and becoming going to be a lot more useful for this next season. So recharge is happening, but it's very regional. That's one thing that's really, from an outsider, it's probably a little bit more difficult to understand all these different subbasins that we have take recharge at very different rates. So while I can speak to the area that I'm in that way, you go 30 miles a different direction, and it's a completely different story.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome point. CJ, you talk about, from an outsider's perspective, I'm sitting here in Memphis, Tennessee, and I hear on the big news that California's getting rain and everything's recharged and glorious.
Oh yeah.
But you're kind of telling us, boy, it's still broken down from a regional perspective of how good is good.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's, the news does not do us much service most of the time when it comes to water issues in California. So, this type of thing happens, and they want everybody to think problems are over, and I think, that's really not going to be the case for moving forward in agriculture water use for sure. So,
CJ, earlier on, you talked a little bit, you've been involved with a lot of policy and kind of keeping your ear close to that. And you've had a voice there. And clearly now that you're on the Alta Irrigation District Board, you're probably getting a little bit more involved in. What are some hot topics that outsiders need to really understand about some of the workings from a political standpoint, from an irrigation standpoint, some of the things growers are facing in your market? So
some of the biggest issues growers are facing, that's a good question. There's a lot of them, but locally in my area, I would say one issue that we're facing, well, first of all, irrigation efficiency is something that's got to help save water, obviously. And so at Streamline, that's what we specialize in, is increased efficiency in irrigation and fertilizer delivery. And, switching to micro irrigation and subsurface irrigation and all these different changes that we can do, and then focusing on irrigation scheduling, there's millions of acre feet every year that we can save just by doing that, which is a great thing. But one consequence of switching to drip that, at least in our area specifically, switching to drip has made people a lot more reliant on using well water because it's easier to put a pump in a well and pressurize it than sometimes it is to pressurize surface water. And so the one thing that we're going to be focusing a lot on over the next 5 years, and we have been over the 5 years previous, is putting in infrastructure to pressurize surface water in order to apply it through micro and drip irrigation. So that's one of the issues. The infrastructure has changed because 40 years ago, 50 years ago, everything was flood irrigated in the Central Valley. And there's still a good portion of that it is, but that, the change of infrastructure so quickly, a lot of people went to drip. I mean, there's a lot of drip and micro went in all at once. And a lot of this older infrastructure kind of went to the wayside and kind of became not usable. And we're finding now that a lot of guys wish they still had that in place and had it usable, because the opportunity to take that water and pressurize it, or take that water and sink it on their ranches when there's flood release, things like that. So taking the surface water and utilizing it more is probably when we do have it, is probably one of the bigger things that we've got to figure out how to do better over the next 3 to 5 years.
So just so I'm clear and our listeners are clear, so when we do get these rains like you're experiencing now, having those older ditches in place to retain that water on the ranch is really an opportunity. In a lot of cases. Yeah.
For instance, we have the Kings River right now, and the most confusing. California water is confusing, and no matter what I say, there's going to be people that listen to this and say I'm wrong. And you talk to me in 3 years, and I might tell you I'm wrong. I really don't know, but the Kings River, for instance, right now has been flowing a lot of water, and it's all from watershed below the actual dam itself. And so we're sending a lot of this river water past our district specifically. And there's not really a way to slow it down because it's not coming in from any point where we have a good amount of control. So it's runoff. So we'll stash as much as we can and sink it in areas where it's useful to us. And then the remainder of it, keeps flowing down. So if we can increase our storage capacity to sink water further up the river where we are, then that becomes tremendously useful for us.
And roughly, if we were to sink some of that water, what's the timeline? How long can that water be retained if we were to sink that on a ranch typically?
Oh, that's a really hard question to answer because it really varies from ranch to ranch. But the way that it's, the way that the water sinking is being looked at here is taking credit for it. So you can use, if you're sinking water off growing season, you can then have credit for that to pump it later. So, and it's different in every single geologic area.
Okay. So yeah, it's an opportunity. You may not necessarily utilize that water, but you obtain a water credit for that, for accessing other water down the road. Yeah.
And for instance, like if I were to put a pond in, we're about in the area that I live, you might put a 5 acre foot capacity pond out there and eventually it'll drain in. It might take 2 weeks for it to sink in, but you go 30 miles south and you put a 5 acre foot pond in, it'll sink that thing every 2 days, or just drain it just because the makeup of the soil is different and is more conducive to actually sinking water.
So you referenced technology. What kind of trends do you feel are going to be helping growers, as we kind of evolve in this space?
It's a good question. I think probably one of the biggest improvements that can be made is irrigation scheduling for a lot of growers. And I think you'll see that a lot of people are understanding that because you see companies all over trying to do that for people. As a drip irrigation and micro irrigation supply company, we provide a tool to, deliver water and nutrients. But a lot of the time, if we don't educate growers, then the tool's not really that useful. And a lot of the time you see a lot of under or over irrigation. So I think, irrigation scheduling is going to be a big deal. One thing that we're focused on as a company is the actual automation side of, starting pumps, opening valves, monitoring reservoir levels, monitoring well pumping water levels. So I think the technology side of it that relates to irrigation scheduling and being as efficient as we can with that is going to be that's the lowest hanging fruit to me as far as saving water, either pumped out of the ground or making the water, surface water that we have, stretch out and more useful.
Absolutely, yeah. And as technology evolves, all of those tools become more and more effective, and we're seeing that in irrigation all across the country, and it's very
Yeah,
important, especially in your
yeah,
geography.
definitely.
Kind of back to policy a little bit. What are some hot policies that are kind of on the forefront right now that some of your customers are looking at, maybe some state legislatures looking at in California, and what do you see happening there in the next, say, 12 months?
That's a tough question for me to answer. In the next 12 months, I don't really think there's going to be a lot of change. There's still a lot of focus on Sigma and implementation of that. So we see a lot of different planning and different. I don't know what the term is, but our GSAs are working hard to try to figure out what they're going to do individually. So we have as far as next 12 months in policy, like there's going to be probably a lot of talk, but I don't really think much will change. I think everybody kind of has their hands full preparing for Sigma and getting that all figured out. To where with the rain and stuff we've seen recently, it's helpful, but I don't think there's going to be a huge effect on any policy because of it.
From your perspective, how do you feel these current rains are going to impact growers ultimately and consumers really as we look into 23?
From the grower perspective, it's kind of funny because everybody prays for rain, and then myself included in that, but myself included in the fact that we complain about it once we have it because it sets everything back so much. So we have, guys trying to prep for planting, and, there's a lot that goes into that, from fumigation to soil amendments to getting us in there to put underground pipes in to ordering plants and berming and all this stuff. And so this stuff, all these different inputs that have to happen to develop a piece of ground, they all kind of get piled up at once. And there's just only a certain amount of contractors in our area. So it's not like, you need to get a guy out to mark your field for planting. Well, there's like 5 or 6 guys and they're all in the same boat. They have everybody screaming at them to come out and get stuff done. So the biggest impact, for us is that it's piling up all of our work at once, which is difficult, especially in California, where our labor laws are getting more difficult every year to deal with and stay profitable. And, so they keep giving us hurdles. And so rain years like this, it gets very difficult to get the amount of work that we need to get done, as a contractor. But for the grower, it creates a lot of stress and sometimes stuff will just get pushed back a year. So, then that's a huge, huge deal for a grower. But yeah, the immediate effect, I think we're seeing good. The other immediate effect we're seeing is, like you mentioned earlier, is we're seeing some recharge, which is helpful. And, I think a rain like this is going to be good for our area because they'll look and go, wow, we need to invest in infrastructure so that we can do more good for our area with this water that's flowing past us. So,
yeah, and I think like most agriculture, when you do get rains like this, it changes attitudes, and and yes, there's probably some additional stress because of, your workload gets a little more compacted, but at the end of the day, you've got rain. We've gone in California. You tell me. It feels like 5, 6, 7 years without good moisture, and just having skies open up is an attitude adjustment in a lot of cases.
No, it for sure is, and I don't want to sound like overall, this is great. This is a great thing. I wish it happened more frequently, like all Californians do. But yeah, the rain definitely has been an attitude shift for most people involved in ag around here, and it's very pleasant.
Right. And I think you touched on something really important. It highlights maybe some of the infrastructure needs that we truly do need in agriculture, especially throughout Central California and other parts of California for that matter. So when these rains do come, we have the ability to take advantage of that.
Yeah, definitely. We're dealing with, 100-year-old infrastructure in certain areas, 100-year plus here in Central California where we're operating. And In the last 50 years, I think we've torn down, 40 or 50 dams in the state of California, and we haven't been able to add anything up to this point. And honestly, I think it would be helpful, but I don't know that it's physically possible to build a dam in California anymore with all the challenges that go along with that.
Are you referring to like regulatory issues or?
Yeah, environmental issues, and our state is I guess the best way to put it is there's a lot of very polarizing opinions. So you have the farmers on one side who, are growing food to feed people, and you have the environmentalists on the other side who are, they're a lot of the time, they're trying to preserve, their intentions are good, but at the same time, we're also trying to preserve an artificial environment. Like the river that I live near, as much as I love it, I love fishing there and I love taking my kids there and kayaking and everything. But at the end of the day, it's not a natural river channel anymore in my mind. This is an irrigation canal that we're using to deliver water. So we have this weird place where nobody can really agree on anything, and the environmentalists unfortunately hold all the power in California.
Yeah, well, and I think it's important. You pointed out earlier, your infrastructure is in a lot of places over 100 years old, and heck, even the water district that you're a part of in Alta, it was founded in 1882. And those district boundaries still encompass 129,000 acres, and with 111,000 cropping acres for one water district. And you referenced it. Some of that 111,000 acres, we're not talking wide open corn and wheat country here. We're talking some intense crops that are grown in that particular water district. What are some of the top crops grown right there geographically?
It ranges a lot, but it's mostly permanent crop. We have there's a lot of citrus, a lot of nuts, there's a lot of almonds, pistachios. We have, that's on the north end of our district. It's mostly citrus in that area. There's still a lot of stone fruit up that way too, but it's mostly stone fruit, citrus, and nut crops in our area.
Yeah, and that's my point is, in this 111,000 acres, those are intense crops that are, like you mentioned, permanent. And having that infrastructure right is really, really important long-term for the viability of that area, as well as, the needs to feed the globe, really, because that market definitely feeds a wide population, not just the United States, but globally.
Oh yeah, no, I've seen fruit from our area all over, and we get texts from friends in, New York and Missouri, and they get excited when, we have family that texts us, hey, this fruit's from Reedley or from Kingsburg or whatever. And it really does make it all over the place. And the infrastructure thing's a real deal. I mean, every year it gets more expensive. Every year it gets harder to deal with any of the groups that you might have to deal with in order to get anything done. So, I mean, there are some real challenges, and I'm not just talking about the area I'm in, but most irrigation districts have a lot of challenges over the next, moving forward, they have a lot of challenges, but over the next 10 to 20 years, we got to figure out how to get some things done.
Yeah, definitely an area that we as a society, as a nation, need to put some focus on as we continue to grow our population, not just in the U.S., but globally. The food demand is not going away, and we need to be prepared with infrastructure. CJ Myers, I want to thank you for joining us here today on FieldLink. We really appreciate you jumping on and joining us from Kingsburg, California, to share some insight from your perspective as a water expert, as a member of a water district there at Alta Irrigation District, as well as an employee with Streamline Irrigation there in Kingsburg, California. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And at this time, we want to travel on down to Nashville as we bring in Jody Lawrence to commentate about some of the grain markets that are going on right now. Jody, when it Rains, it pours, and we certainly have had a lot of moisture in that western corn belt, and it certainly impacted some of the grain markets here in the U.S., as well as a lot of rain down in Argentina, impacting grain prices today. Jody, what's the latest update on the grain markets?
Well, Bill, it's great to be back. And as we record this on Monday, January 23rd, the last several days and over a weekend, it always becomes a little more volatile in the reaction. The pattern has begun to change in the driest parts of Argentina, getting their best rain and rain coverage in months. And you look at kind of where we are a week or so ago, November beans were trading at or a little bit over $14. We're trading $13.38 today. December corn right after the USDA report on what was that Thursday, the 12th,
Right.
was trading at 612, and now unfortunately we're all the way back to 586. Really just a matter of the market is viewing this pattern change and the potential for additional production in Argentina and Brazil as a bearish factor that is going to cause more supply than the current demand trend is going to be able to chew through. So and that's what we're seeing. The USDA provided a small window after the report, and Mother Nature took it away, as we seem to so often see. We saw it in June. The June USDA report gave us an opportunity, and then it began to rain in the U.S. So this is not an unprecedented event by any means that we get pattern changes right at critical times during the growing season in the northern or southern hemisphere. But it's certainly painful when you watch it, because I'm certainly dealing with the regret of, gosh, I wish I had sold more old crop, more new crop, recommended this, recommended that. And that's just the problem of marketing. You try to stay out of the woulda, shoulda, couldas, because it stresses you out, and you just need to start making decisions and realize you made the best decision you could at the time that you had. So
Yeah, and that's right. We sat on this podcast all last year talking about how dry it was out in the western corn belt, and now we finally got that moisture, and yeah, it's going to impact our wheat prices and some of the other commodity prices today. But hey, it's a long game you left out there, right? And boy, that moisture is very, very critical for those growers in western Nebraska and Oklahoma and Kansas at this time.
absolutely, to say this is especially for the western corn belt and the southern plains, a crop maker would be too large of a stretch. But looking at the models, the market is pricing in a pattern change. And certainly, if you get over the next 3 or 4 months, the western corn belt, eastern Nebraska, Kansas, western Iowa in particular, back up to good soil, subsoil moisture levels, and just kind of a normal water profile heading into planting, the markets will have a much different attitude. And right now they're pricing in a pattern change, which you can't say they're wrong, you can't say they're right, because we have so much time to go. We've certainly seen this happen. Every weather market gets its spikes and its dips, and we'll just have to play the long-term patience game and jump on the opportunities when they present themselves.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. And as we take a look in Argentina and that market there's still a little bit of time yet. That crop's not completely done yet, and a lot that can happen between now and harvest to our friends down in South America. So certainly could impact that global supply as we.
Yeah, and the way I tell everybody, and there are a couple weeks on either side of this, but just think about, okay, we're at January 23rd. They're in the southern hemisphere, so add 6 months to that. Think of all the things that can go wrong from July 23rd on your crop until you get it in the bin. So this is not, it's the game's not over by any means. This is just a bad couple plays in a long series of a game.
You bet. And I think that's important for U.S. growers to keep that in mind as we take a look at today's commodity markets that have taken a little bit of step back here. But, we got a lot of time ahead of us. Jody, let's talk a little bit about diesel. Boy, you offered some really good advice to our listeners here over the last 30 to 45 days. What's going on in the world of diesel today?
Well, crude keeps just trekking on up. It was trading on a couple different podcasts, trading down in that $70 to $72 range, where it became apparent that the U.S. Department of Energy was refilling the strategic reserves. And in that level, and the U.S. was active at that area, excuse me, for quite a while it was down there, and diesel on the March futures was trading in the 385 to 390, or excuse me, the 285 to 295 range at that time. And then we saw China getting a much better response from their change of COVID policy. They announced that they will be a larger, or intend to be a larger importer of both crude and diesel in 2023 and 2024, which gave a little spark to the market. Several private analysts, but several of the big investment banks have set targets at $95 to $100 a barrel for crude. And sitting here at 82, and that $10 rally in crude, diesel went up right at 60 cents. So if crude were to put on another 10, we will be back in that scenario where diesel futures are trading over $4, and at the pump, you're going to see a number exceeding 5 again until they get some more refining capacity in place.
Definitely a lot of movement there in the diesel market. And boy, that global narrative continues to play an impact the U.S. market, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And China in particular. In China, how they come out of they're in their week-long holiday celebrating the Lunar New Year this week, which always slows down their activity. But when they come back from it, and if the vaccination rates increase, if the COVID cases go down and the lockdowns stop, China really is going to be potentially the biggest bullish wild card, or certainly the biggest non-weather wild card that could be very bullish. Because if they come back guns blazing with all the government stimulus they are putting in to restart their economy, then you could see Chinese demand really begin to ramp up, which would help offset the extra supply days like we see today, with a demand engine that could chew through some of these extra bushels.
Lots happening definitely globally. We continue to stay close to this energy market and better understand that because, boy, things are changing on a day-to-day basis there. Jody, we've got a lot of reports coming up here soon with the USDA as well as some other global reports. What's coming around the corner?
Well, we'll have the monthly update from the USDA in February. That will not be nearly as big of a deal as the January was, because they won't go back and alter any of the 2022 crop, but they will give some supply and demand information. The bigger ones coming up are going to be the USDA Ag-Economic Forum, which will be coming late February, and also the prospective planting report, where they are giving their best estimates from all of their economic models and their calculations about how many acres the U.S. farmer intends to plant. We already know that about 1.5 million to 2 million extra acres have gone into winter wheat this year, largely due when the price of wheat was so high after the invasion than during the summer. That's going to be something to account for. We know cotton is losing acreage because, unfortunately, we're still straggling below the break-even cost to plant cotton. So where corn and beans fall, it's always in the mix of 88 to 90 million for either one of them. And right now, both of them have taken a hit over the past 4 days of trading, but at 586 December futures and 1338 November beans, corn is still favored. just a little bit. It was favored before, and now it's favored, I think, just a little bit more, depending if you're just doing average calculations across the country. And with that, you could see corn getting to 90 and beans somewhere in the 87 to 88 million acres. And we'll just have to see how everything plays out, because one of the interesting things about this transition from El Nino to La Nina is that it typically indicates you're going to have a wetter spring, not necessarily cold and wet, and certainly doesn't say that it's going to be a 2019 Eastern Corn Belt washout up until June, but it does favor that. So the acreage mix, you can decide right now during prepay what you intend to plant. Mother Nature's going to have the final say, and we've certainly seen some million and a half, 2 million acre swings between corn and beans in the past 7 to 8 years, that you can't feel confident in late January saying this is what's going to be planted, and this is going to be ending stocks. So much to play in both South America, Southern Hemisphere, and U.S. and Northern Hemisphere over the next 9 months until we start to get it in the bin.
Wow. A lot happening definitely globally. And, as we look at these supplies, it's going to be very important for growers to have a good plan and stay close to their marketing and trading advisors and their Helena representative if things evolve throughout the next couple of months before planting really starts in. Jody, you're going to be on the road here over the next 30 to 45 days. You're going to be at the Mid-South Gin Show February 24th in Memphis, correct?
Yes, that's right. We're going to come down and kick some tires on some big pieces of machinery and eat some ribs at the Rendezvous, I hope, with a few of the listeners on this podcast. And it's a home game for me because I grew up in Memphis, so I'll get to see Dad and hang out with him for a little bit in the middle of this, and just catch up with all of the great people at Helena that'll be manning the show, and all the rest of the people in the industry that we've been fortunate to get to know through the years.
All right. Then you're off to Orlando, Florida to the Commodity Classic. We'll see you down there on March 9th through the 11th. We'll catch you there then, Jody.
Yes, and we'll be at the Helena booth. I think you and I are going to do a couple different podcast segments, and I'll be hanging around for anybody to come talk about markets, or really just talk about anything in particular. I got it'll be fun. Hope the weather is good, which I'm sure it will be in Orlando. And since I am not a Disney person or a theme park person, I'll be just as happy on the floor of the Commodity Classic as I would be going to see some of the rides.
All right. Well, we look forward to seeing you here in Memphis as well as Orlando at the Commodity Classic in the Gin Show coming up here in February and March. And Jody, I want to thank you for joining us today here on FieldLink Podcast. Look forward to catching you next time.
Okay, Bill. Thank you.
And recent rains across the western part of the nation, particularly in California, have been both a blessing and a curse for many growers in the region. In the past 45 days, the state's received nearly 5 times the annual rainfall. Well, that much needed rain has been a blessing for many producers. The vast amount in such a short time has created new issues for the previously drought-stricken area for local fields and orchards. So how will this recent occurrence impact growers and consumers for the next few months? Well, we're going to find out. Joining us today on FieldLink is Matt Beene and Brian Gogue from Helena in Hanford, California. Both Matt and Brian work closely with growers in Central California, and they have an intimate understanding of how the recent rains could impact growers' decisions for 2023, and how some of these recent destructions could impact food prices for consumers around the United States. Well, Matt and Brian, guys, certainly want to welcome both of you here. We're just going to jump into it. Matt, tell us a little bit about your background and your responsibilities as a branch manager at Helena.
I'm a branch manager, like you said, in Hanford, California. It's in the center of the state. If you're familiar with the state of California, the biggest city in the center of the state is called Fresno. We're about an hour south of Fresno. And so I'm a branch manager. We have 6 sales reps. We have some support people that deliver fertilizer and ag chemicals. Previously to being a branch manager, I worked in Helena as a agronomist and a product manager, so I've been with the company a long time. Some of the crops we service here in this part of the state would be our permanent crops. Those are trees and vines. The trees would be the tree nuts like almonds, walnuts, pistachios. Grapes would be raisin, wine grapes, and then some of our row crops, so tomatoes, and some of the crops that support the dairy industry. We do grow corn in California. Most of it is used for silage, so it goes into a bag or a pile, as well as wheat that we grow for the dairies as well in triticale. So those are the major crops that we deal with.
Wow, you have quite a range of crops there. What, about 20, 30, 40 different crops? Or I know the state of California boasts around 400 plus crops. Sounds like you're right in the middle of it all.
Yeah, no, there's a big mix. There's quite a big mix. You can be standing on a corner of an avenue or road, and all four corners of this road or avenue, you could have a different crop. That's very, very common.
Wow. Excellent. And also joining us is Brian. Brian, you get to work with California growers every day. What brought you into the industry, and tell us about your journey?
So I've been with Helena for about 26 years. I started in the summer of '96 as an intern. Back in the high school days, I started taking some FFA classes. I had family that farmed, but I was never involved whatsoever. But through the FFA classes, kind of took a liking to ag. Going into college, I knew I wanted to be involved in ag, but didn't know exactly what. Eventually was able to hear about the Helena internship program. I was able to become an intern. I loved that first year. Did a second year and also a third year. And upon that third year, the plan was once I graduated after that year, I would be coming on full time. And did 2 years of a sales trainee position and been full-time ever since.
Wow, that's an awesome journey. That's exciting. Started right out of college as an intern with Helena and kind of grown up through the industry. Well, welcome both of you guys here to FieldLink. To kind of tee it up a little bit, I think, most of our listeners may or may not be aware that California produces nearly $43.5 billion in agriculture products annually and is ranked number 5 in the world in terms of agriculture production. Plus, the state also ranks number 1 in the U.S. for the production and export of crops for the past 50 years. As we talked about earlier, there's over 400 crops produced in this state that, definitely hit all of our plates every day. So we're really excited to really focus in on California and some of the challenges as well as some of the opportunities that we're all facing here. And Brian, many of the customers in your area have permanent crops such as almonds. How have these recent rains impacted these particular crops?
Definitely a very positive thing. So we've spent the last 2+ years in a significant drought. Most of my business is in the Westlands Water District, the west side of the valley in our area. And we were coming off of 2 years of 0% surface water allocation. So that means basically almost 100% of what has been applied has been pumped out of the ground. And the wells we have out west are pretty terrible, loaded with plenty of sodium, boron, chlorides, a lot of negative impacts there. It's wet, so we do it to farm these acres, but there's a lot of negative impacts that comes with that. So with these rains we've had, it's made some challenges as well, but it has allowed a lot of these salts and bad things to be able to start leaching out. Guys that got on amendments prior to these rains are sitting very pretty right now, able to break those down and get to working as they need to. Still got some of that to go. Guys didn't get it in time, but hopefully we got plenty of rain ahead of us still. So yeah, very positive thing just as far as what's gone on to point. And going to be a very positive thing for us moving into this year as well.
Hey, Brian, you referenced, the surface waters. And for some of our listeners that are not familiar with irrigation, can you talk about surface water versus, some of the other forms of irrigation in your market?
Yeah, so surface water I've always seen as kind of the number one thing you want. The systems that it's delivered in is always a very simple system to use for a grower. Doesn't require much power to make it happen versus a well where some of the wells out on the west side were going 2,000 plus feet deep to pump this water. You're talking 500-600 horsepower motors to get it out of the ground. Electric bills are through the roof on some of that now, so your cost of pumping water can be $350 an acre foot just to pump your own water out of the ground. The surface water, like I said, a very simple solution for delivery. And although costs have gone up on surface water allocations over the years, still cheaper route to go. And then back to the point I was making where your well water is pretty dirty water, not very good water. Surface water is generally very clean, on occasion too clean, but we can really use that clean water to help us.
Definitely. And Brian, tell us a little bit about some of the customers you referenced that had some of their, fertility down prior to these rains. What percentage of your customers had some of their fertility in place prior to some of the big rains?
Amendment-wise and potash-wise, I probably had around 60, maybe 70% of guys completed with all that work before the rains really set in on us. So I got that balance left to go here and the next couple of weeks. This week is opening up for us. It's going to be nice and sunny and dry. We expect a little more rain Sunday, Monday, or Monday, Tuesday of next week. Not a huge expectation of something there, but we got some work to get done while we do have some dry weather, and hopefully we can turn this back on in February again.
Sure. So you're getting ready, 3-4 weeks out from a pretty darn critical time for almond growers in that area. Almond bloom is going to be around the corner. What are some of the challenges that growers may face this year that they haven't had to deal with over the past several years because of this moisture?
A couple of thoughts on mine there is some of the physical things we got to get done. We got to get some herbicide work done on a lot of these fields as well. And certain herbicides, you have to get them applied prior to the almond bud break and they start pushing and growing. So we're trying to get some of that done here quickly. If we don't get that done before the crop starts, we do have other options for herbicides that do not have those restrictions. So we got some flexibility there. There's guys that stuff do a lot of mummy shaking in the almonds, and you want to get that done before you get much growth in those things because you'll start breaking off your new growth and breaking off the bud. So that's pretty critical here soon too.
Okay. I'm the new guy here. Mummy shaking. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So a mummy is considered a almond nut from last year that is stuck on the tree still over the winter. Navel orangeworm is one of our biggest pests in almonds as well as pistachios. And you want to get those off the tree and destroyed, either buried in the ground with disking them in or flail shredding them, mowing them to destroy them so we don't have a carryover of orangeworm pressure coming into the year. It's the number one thing you can do for sanitation to keep your orangeworm population down.
Awesome. Thanks for the info there. Any other tips for almond producers or nut producers in your market for as they're looking at 23?
Yeah, the other thing I was thinking of there is as we are forecast to see quite a bit more rain come February. So if we do see a lot of rains during that bloom period, we're definitely looking at getting some fungicide shots on. My typical program is we get into that early bloom stage or pink bud stage. If there's rain in the forecast, then I would typically apply a fungicide at that point. If it's going to stay pretty dry through that period, then I don't really apply one. As we get into full bloom, I will apply a fungicide regardless of weather. There's benefit to doing that regardless if we get rain in the forecast or not. If we're getting rains throughout that period, the number one choice is to get in by ground and make those applications. We can put on 100 gallons of water an acre, get excellent coverage in those buds and blooms. And if it's too wet to do that, we got to shift some of that to aerial applications, which are not as effective due to just coverage. We're going to apply 15, maybe 20 gallons of water an acre compared to the 100 by ground. So maybe some shifting in that direction as well, and hopefully we can even get in by air in some of those cases.
Wow, yeah, definitely. Growers haven't had to deal with some of that moisture in the past here, most recent years, and fungicide's certainly going to be a critical part of their program this year. Matt, your branch touches other crops beyond the almonds and pistachios areas. How's the rain impacted some of these crops as well as vegetables?
So our primary crops that are non-tree crops this time of year that are on the ground and growing is wheat. We plant wheat or triticale in the fall. That'd be the October, November timing. This crop's planted, it overwinters, and it really takes off growing when things start to warm up in January and February. And if we don't get rains in these winter months, we have to supplement with irrigation water. And irrigation water is good, but it's not as effective. It just doesn't work as good as just the rain that leaches the salts out and provides just the right amount of moisture. This also affects our fertility. You need nitrogen to grow wheat. It doesn't matter if you grow wheat in California or Washington or wherever. And so we can fly on urea, which is a very cost-effective form of nitrogen, and the rains will wash in the urea. If we don't get any rain, then that kind of scratches your nitrogen application with urea. We have to apply another form of nitrogen called UAN32. Some of your listeners might use 28%. We use 32% out west. And so we have to, it's called a water run. And as we irrigate these fields with flood irrigation, we dribble the nitrogen fertilizer in the irrigation water. And as the water spreads to the field, so does your nitrogen. And that's not as good of an application. It's not as uniform for various reasons, but it'll work. So overall, the rain has been really good for fertility, putting on the right amount of nitrogen, getting it applied, uniformly, as well as having a really healthy plant that is just looking really good. So it's been good for our row crops, specifically wheat and triticale.
Matt, as far as some of the vegetable crops outside of maybe your market, what are you hearing from some of your colleagues? What's the crop looking like for example, lettuce and some of these other trucking crops, maybe further south from some of your other fellow branch managers? What are you hearing from them?
So by this time of year, most of the lettuce is coming out of the Yuma, Arizona market, which is right on the border of California, Arizona. And so previous to that, it comes out of pretty close to us. There's a little town called Huron that grows some lettuce. And the pricing, at least what I've heard recently, has been really good because there's been a pest in the Salinas Valley, where most of our lettuce is grown during the summertime, that has spread some type of virus. I can't recall the name, but it's really devastated the crop coming out of Salinas. And so the price and with the value that these farmers were getting for their lettuce has been really good. And so once this lettuce goes through Yuma, it kind of gets too warm there in April or March, whatever, then the market will move back to Salinas Valley. But they've had some issues that's what's been so unique about these storms we've got. Usually in California, you get a storm, the center part of the state will get wet, the northern part will get wet, or the southern part. We've got wet from north to south and just record amount of rain in a short time. So we even got rain in some of these desert areas where we grow our winter produce, and that's kind of slow down harvest, slow down growth, and their operations there.
You bring up a great point. The whole state's really got moisture, and it certainly needs it. Great snowpack in the northern areas that clearly going to be important as summer progresses, as long as it doesn't all melt off immediately. If we have a nice slow thaw, that'll impact everybody regenerating those reservoirs for sure. What kind of tips, Matt, do you feel are going to be pretty important for growers to be keeping an eye on, in your market as you take a look at 23?
I would say just keeping track of, your inputs. Inputs have changed a lot. If we were to talk to a grower about how much fertilizer was going to be 2 years ago, we'd have a different story than we would last year. And to try to project what it would be this year, we have guesses. But just look at your inputs, look at your market, look where you're spending money. I know everybody's trying to save costs on some of these commodities that are a little bit leaner, but just try to put your value, talk to your crop consultant or your sales rep, and where they could put their inputs where they'd benefit their production system the most, because you want to put your assets or your resources where they're most benefited.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that growers definitely need to be, tied to the hip right now as the market's changing and as Mother Nature's changing it for us and some of these unique markets for sure. Brian, let's talk a little bit about some agronomic tips that you can provide to tree growers in the market, and how is agri-intelligence being used in some of these solutions, especially after these rains?
Yeah, I do use that quite a bit. For me, primarily, I'm using that in the fall time, getting the high ground program out there, either running the machine through the field, a field I have not run in the past, and getting that data back in my hands, or fields that we have done that in the past, we are getting fresh soil samples pulled out of those exact same locations. And based upon those different zones that we have created there, I'm creating individual recommendations. And we have plenty of applicators out here, whether it be a tree crop or an open ground scenario row crop. We can get those products applied where they need to be applied and the rates they need to be applied. And oftentimes we're saving growers a lot of money and not putting something where it does not need to be. So we get a lot of efficiencies out of that. Throughout the season, I do use the extractor or tissue samples. Basically in the tree crops for sure once a month. So I'm really staying on top of what things are looking like out there. And sometimes those are pulled out of specific zones as well. And also pulling tissue samples in every crop, just not as intensely as we are in almonds and pistachios.
Sure. And I can imagine this year with all of this moisture and all the fertility going up and down, with all of the opportunities here, that extractor report is going to be pretty critical. A lot of things are going to be changing throughout the growing season. So having those, to your point, monthly or so is going to be very important. Matt, tell us a little bit about some of the crops that might be experiencing some stress. what are some products that growers might want to consider as we take a look at stress in some of these crops moving into 23?
So first that comes to mind is, our biggest crop is almonds. And as we consider these rains keep coming, it looks like it's forecasted to continue to be wet. It's fine right now where the tree's dormant, but as the tree wakes up, the roots start to respire, and it's got some wet feed. It's really hard for all those metabolic processes to do what they need to do. So we found it really helpful to apply some of our Helena products. One is called Exploit. You apply it at bloom to seaweed extract. It's got all kinds of good ingredients and modes of actions that help the metabolism, especially of nitrogen. When your nitrogen isn't, basically being taken up as efficiently as it could be because of the wet soil, we found out that product's been pretty helpful. Another one is Megaful. We sell a lot of Megaful all year round, and when you get some of these, and like right now it's going to be really cold, and some of our crops where maybe we're applying a herbicide on wheat or triticale. And the way these herbicides, they kill the weed, but they don't kill the crop because the crop can metabolize the herbicide. Well, Megafol we found helps these crops metabolize the herbicide that's applied over the top better than when it's not applied. So we typically apply a rate of Megafol in most herbicide applications on our winter wheat or triticale. Those are two management practices that we find pretty helpful.
That's awesome. Earlier on, Matt, we talked a little bit about the importance of planning, the importance of having a plan. And, you go into these kind of seasons, and I know, Brian, you probably did the same thing with your customers last fall, having this great plan, and then boom, we get all this rain, which is awesome, but we need to adjust those plans. With these recent rains, what kind of plans do we need to? We talked a little bit about the financial side. Are there any other things that we need to be thinking about as we plan for 23 right now, and you're just really weeks away from the crop really kicking in gear?
So basically all the plans were kind of laid in stone last fall. And now with all these rains, things are changing a little bit. One of the biggest things we're faced with out here is called SGMA, and that is the acronym for Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And that restricts our pumping out of the ground by quite a bit, and in Westlands Water District very significantly. So they were limited to be able to pump 1.3 acre feet this coming year. And I think within about 5 or 6 years, it'll be a 7-inch maximum on pumping. Other districts are faced with that as well, just probably not quite as severe. I believe these rains we're seeing right now will alleviate the pressure we're seeing from that this year. That should overcome that, plus add some additional allocation. So obviously there's nothing to plant when it comes to an almond or a pistachio. They're already in the ground ready to roll. But on the row crop side, tomatoes are a big crop for us out west here, and requires a little planning on that. You got to get your seed into a greenhouse, get it germinated and growing, and you put your transplant out in the field. So you can't just say today I want to plant tomatoes tomorrow and make it happen. I think there will be some additional acres of tomatoes secured due to this extra allocation we're looking forward to. But I think we will see an increase in cotton acres this year. It's been pretty slim for us the last few years, whereas my early years, it was almost 100% of what we had at this location here. Cotton is pretty simple to turn a switch on and plant a couple days later. So I think we will see a shift in that regard back towards our Hanford location here. You can see a little more shift of that towards corn as well. And like Matt mentioned earlier, primarily for silage for dairy feed.
Yeah, a lot of changes, a lot of opportunities, for some crops that growers maybe not have touched for a long time, and now may be a gap, and there'll be a lot of pencils being sharpened, I'm guessing, here as we enter the next 20 to 30 days here. Critical time for you growers out in the central part of California. Matt, Brian, as we kind of wrap up, are there any last thoughts that you guys like to share with our listeners about some of the recent rains, as well as some of the opportunities in your market this year?
I would just say, for me, if you're not familiar with California agriculture and how it works, you see on the news and all the rain we got, there was some devastation, there was some flooding, but for a lot of part of the state, it was good. Our reservoirs are filling up. They're back to close to normal, which is amazing that they can get back to normal in a short, 4-5 weeks. But this rain that we get is critical for agriculture to thrive out west, because we're not a rain-fed environment. Everything is almost 100% irrigated, and we need this rain and the storage of the rain in the form of snow and reservoirs to make ag, work out west.
That's awesome. And Brian, any last parts here?
Yeah, I think kind of the setbacks we have seen with all this rain, we've been in almost an absolute standstill for 3 weeks, getting very little done. But I think guys are very willing to accept that. We can take these setbacks and not get things done, pass up on things that we wanted to do, as long as we get these allocations that are just absolutely critical to us to be able to farm some acres that wouldn't otherwise be farmed, and to be able to help the soil and leach the sodium out that we've been damaged with for the last couple of years, putting all that extra stress on our crops. Very hot years, the last couple of years, kind of extreme heat for a couple of years in a row. And that coupled with those salts in the soil from the well water has just been very damaging to almost all of our crops. And this provides a major relief for us.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Brian. These natural rains like this are really going to clean the soil out a little bit, and maybe hit that reset button for a lot of producers in your market. And so good things are going to happen out of all these rains, and hopefully they kind of continue in a timely manner and adequate manner to produce the yields that you and your customers really hope to have. Guys, I want to thank you joining us here today on FieldLink. We appreciate all that you do, and I encourage all growers to in your market to reach out to your Helena representative to learn more about some of the opportunities to maximize your yield as we take a look at 2023.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Bill.
Hey, folks, I want to thank you very much for joining us here on this episode of FieldLink. If you haven't already, we encourage you to go out and subscribe to the FieldLink podcast on your favorite platform.